IVM.
Hey everybody, welcome to another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Paytm Money. So we had a really interesting week on the network. Definitely check out some of the shows that came out there. We had interesting episodes on Cyrus Says, Advertising is Dead, Filter Coffee Podcast, Glass Station Adulthood, Mr. and Mrs. Binge Watch, Besa Vesa. All of these shows had some really, really cool guests on, and there were some really good episodes out there. Do check them out. I'm sure you'll enjoy them. And with that, let's get you on with your show.
Welcome to a very special episode of the Geek Fruit Podcast with me, Tejas, and Dinkar. How's it going, man?
It's going well, Tejas. How are you?
I am doing okay. And what's interesting to note about that is, the world has kind of moved on since we last recorded, but we're all still recording from our homes. And because of that, we've decided to take a break from all the screens that we're watching all the time at home. And this week talk about something that, well, I guess is a bit of not a spin-off of last week's episode where we spoke about Tintin. But since we were, discussing an amazing graphic novel, which is what I guess you could call that, and a comic book series, we decided to maybe dive a little bit deeper into that area and that category, and maybe explore some of the more interesting formats that are there in graphic novels and comic book series. Specifically, this week we're going to be talking about one-shots and miniseries. But Dinkar, tell me what kind of, what all categories are there within the graphic novel space that we could, elaborate upon?
There's an astonishing amount. And I think like some of the examples that I was just putting down that we should talk about, I think I picked specifically so that we can talk about the wide range of possible graphic novels. But broadly speaking, they're stories with pictures. Of course, that's like a very loose definition. But the kind of stuff we're talking about today are self-contained stories. Now, they can be self-contained stories about characters you already know. Like you could have a Batman one-shot, for example, which is just a single story from start to finish. There are your classic examples like The Killing Joke or Year One.
Yeah.
But there are also graphic novels which are just like completely new characters, typically authors who are essentially writing novels, but with graphics. Hence the term graphic novel. I just figured that out. That's not true.
They didn't bother inventing a new word for it. They were just like, put both words together, that's what it is. It is really what it is. I mean, it is really images with text, but of course it's a lot deeper than that. The interesting thing is that the ratio of words to text, the words to images also kind of varies in this format, which is also another interesting way that books are made. Like if you have read like even any of like Sarnath Banerjee and his work, a very highly acclaimed Indian author and graphic novelist, his books have a lot of text and images as well, and it's quite interesting that ratio kind of changes. Sometimes it's just images and very little text. But of course, some of the best graphic novels, whether you take like a big studio like a DC Comics or a Marvel Comics, or even graphic novels, they've managed to kind of, just independent graphic novels. I'd say my favorite ones, obviously, the ones that do both really, really well, where there's just enough text to, kind of tell the story well, enough great dialogue, as well as, just like lush imagery that, that you can only find in a graphic novel as opposed to a novel. So, that's definitely interesting. I wanted to talk about the one-shot thing versus graphic novels. Would you call every graphic novel that is not part of an ongoing series a one-shot?
No. I would say, like, I mean, personally, I've always kind of thought of the term one-shot as something that takes story, like characters that you know, and does a single contained story, because that feels like, well, that's a one-shot. As opposed to a graphic novel, which is like a standard thing, right? I would say the closest analog is franchise movies versus just movies.
Right.
Like regular movies.
So would you say so technically a Doctor Strange or something is not it is a one shot because it's telling you a self-contained story. You don't have to watch the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe to watch that movie.
Yeah, that's true.
But if you want, then yeah. But I guess it is the same. It's the same thing, right? Like you can read a one shot like a Killing Joke, and the importance is that of that example particularly is that graphic novel, even though is highly acclaimed as like one of the greatest one shots, ended up becoming part of the continuity anyway.
It became canon, because it was so widely loved.
Yes. So on this episode, we're going to be talking about, we're going to maybe just talk about some of our favorite one-shots and mini-series. We're also going to include mini-series because I think sometimes, books get compiled after the fact, like after the series comes out, and then when they make a volume out of it, then that volume becomes like,
essentially a graphic novel.
A graphic novel.
This happened in the case of like Watchmen is a famous example. I'd say
Watchmen, is definitely one example of that. Or even, I guess Scott Pilgrim doesn't really count because that's still like every book was released
I suppose
over a series of over a period of time.
Yeah.
And once they finish 7, then obviously they try to kind of compile it. But it's nice.
We're working with a loose definition, but how about this? Okay, I would say our intention here is we're going to talk about some graphic stories that you can dive into without having to deal with the baggage of continuity. And that's it.
Graphic stories. It's important to note that because, one of the things that is always like kind of something that people are apprehensive about is that where do I begin with, with graphic novels, and where do I begin with a Batman? If I just love Batman, where do I start? And I can't start like in media res, but the truth is you can start in media res. And I think all comics and comic book creators kind of understand that it's really hard to keep up, which is why we keep seeing like reboots of different, series to kind of bring back to the status quo. Even like the Marvel Cinematic Universe has gone through like a status quo reset after Endgame. So I think every kind of series knows that it has to kind of renew its kind of subscription with its users and its readers in many ways. So we're here to kind of tell you about some of the best self-contained stories that you could probably just dive into before you go catch up with another character that you may enjoy, and maybe some graphic novels that are independent of any basically not involving any famous characters. They're just like stories that make for great, basically sit down in one go and just like read the entire thing. So, all right, let's take a short break and then come back and discuss these novels.
Beta, did you know 79% of all scientists in NASA are Indian only?
देखो, इंडिया में टैक्स सिर्फ मिडिल क्लास भरती है. Everyone is just enjoying free यार.
आजकल के youngsters are only interested in partying and enjoying. उनको देश की पड़ी ही नहीं है.
बेटा तुम बस शादी कर लो, उसके बाद तो you can enjoy life like anything.
I will tell you what this country needs. This country needs 15 years of dictatorship. That is the only way to become a superpower. See the Chinese, how much they've progressed.
सुनो, तुमने ये WhatsApp forward देखा?
So what's common between all of these statements?
They're all absolutely rubbish.
Fake WhatsApp forwards that spread like wildfire.
And statements that defy any logic.
They are here to debunk them all.
Way of family WhatsApp groups, worst nightmare. Where what happens when you read a book.
Basically, we're just a bunch of guys who want to cut through the bullshit of everyone saying this, how it won't be true.
So that the next time someone confidently squeezes out some WhatsApp or Twitter BS, you can look them dead in the eye and go, Uncle, please sit.
So join me, Joel.
And me, Tushar.
Every Mondays for a fresh new episode of Uncle, Please Sit.
Hey everybody, we're back. We're talking about graphic novels and one-shots. Dinkar, hit me with an example of perhaps one of your favorite one-shots and maybe what you're reading. Okay, first let's start with your favorite, or if you have any favorite.
Man, I don't know. I have many favorites, and we've talked about graphic novels and one-shots before, I think, on this channel. But I kind of just put down a few examples that I thought show a range of what's possible in the medium.
Fair enough.
But speaking of favorites, though, one of my favorite, just ended runs in Marvel Comics is, of course, the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. written by
Great
Ryan North and drawn by a couple of people over the course of the thing. So there is a one-off graphic novel that they did as a part of that series. It's called Squirrel Girl Beats Up the Marvel Universe.
Yeah, I've heard about that. In fact, that has made a lot of children's books lists.
Yeah.
Like I was helping a friend of mine who's she's a middle school teacher, and she was just like, "What do I recommend? I need to give some like assignment work and stuff like that." And I was just like, "Yo, man, you should probably check out like Squirrel Girl for sure." Yeah,
dude. Yeah, it's not only incredibly entertaining and funny. It's also written in it's almost educational, I would say at points, because like, for example, there's Squirrel Girl in this continuity is a computer science student. So there's an entire, I would say one of the regular series that essentially teaches you how to code by like thinking logically and solving problems.
Oh, awesome.
Plus it's just like really funny. Now Beats Up the Marvel Universe, the Squirrel Girl it's part of a old tradition, I would say, of Marvel comics, like that has been happening for maybe like 10 or 15 years, where one character just goes and annihilates the entire Marvel universe. They started with Deadpool, if I'm not mistaken.
I guess, yeah.
Where there's like Deadpool kills the Marvel universe, Deadpool kills the Marvel universe 2, then I think another one where like Deadpool kills the Deadpool universe, where he goes and kills different Deadpools.
That's just called Deadpool kills Deadpool. Deadpool, kills Deadpool. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yes, that one. That is the Deadpool books are all, of course, like incredibly.
Those
gory.
are wild. My God, I've read the Kills the Marvel Universe one. That's absolutely fucking crazy. But you know what? It's so weird that they kind of justify all of the reasons for why Deadpool should do these things, which is the best part of those comics. Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason is essentially, again, being Deadpool and this being like a meta commentary on comics in general. The concept is Deadpool is tired of continuity in comics. So he goes and kills everything so it can be a fresh start, which is so weird, but also like really works.
And it's really interesting because like obviously when they set up Deadpool as this character, like that he is obviously aware, completely self-aware that he can break the fourth wall and knows that he's the only character who knows he's in a comic book, which kind of they basically take that idea which started in the 90s and ran with it so far that they came to the conclusion that Deadpool is the reason why comic books and the Marvel universe exists.
Yeah.
And because of that, he's the only one who can end it. So they kind of set that up, and obviously, they go wild with it.
It's a bizarre idea. But yeah, there have been multiple books like this where basically, again, like, so the tradition I was talking about is one where a character goes out of their storyline and basically goes and meets all the other characters. So the Squirrel Girl Beats Up the Marvel Universe is possibly the best version of any of those storylines. I think just because, man, the Squirrel Girl run by Ryan North it's a complete joy. It's hilarious, but also there is like genuine pathos there. Like the story sometimes just becomes like, it's about essentially friendship, really, above all else, and like learning to work together and stuff like that, like your classic.
Tell us about Squirrel Girl. What are her origins and what are her powers, just so that people can know why they should read her series.
So it began, her origins as a character, I believe she was a part of the New Mutants, maybe, or like the New Mutants, something like that. But essentially she's a squirrel girl. The line that they use is in the Ryan North run is that she's got, and they use the North American pronunciation. So she's got
Squirrel.
all the powers of a squirrel and all the powers of a girl, which is very important. Yeah. So like a lot of her.
So is she actually Squirrel Girl?
Yeah, she's Squirrel Girl. That's the point behind the name, I suppose. She can essentially, she's the Aquaman of squirrels. So she's got some powers of a squirrel. She's got a giant tail. And
she has a tail,
squirrely teeth, and she can communicate with squirrels.
Amazing.
Yeah. So, but I think what I like about the Ryan North run is it doesn't necessarily rely on her powers a lot of the time. Like I said, it's about like relationships and friendships and stuff. So a lot of the time she solves issues using her powers as a girl and not her powers as a squirrel.
Nice.
And
it seems kind of like another comic which reminds me of this is Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur,
yes,
which is also kind of about friendship, but essentially the friendship is between a girl and a very giant, like red Tyrannosaurus Rex. But yeah, I like that they've kind of moved away from the powers becoming the central kind of storytelling function, and mostly just make them human stories, but with, like basically like social science fiction kind of. Yeah. So I think that's awesome, man. So what are the volumes you would suggest?
So there is the regular run, which you can jump into at any point, because they have there's a classic format they do where they catch you up on everything that's happened, basically using tweets. So it's like Squirrel Girl will tweet something going like, all right, so I guess I'm doing this right now. And then like Tony Stark will respond and Spider-Man will respond. And that one page gives you a catch up on everything that's happened. So you can either jump into the regular run, which is now concluded. It ran for like 3 years or so. But the one I'm suggesting is Beats Up the Marvel Universe, which is a one-off story where essentially Squirrel Girl has to go and defeat an evil version of herself.
Nice.
And in the course of that, she meets every single character in the Marvel Universe, essentially.
Cool. Awesome. So everyone check out Squirrel Girl Beats Up the Marvel Universe.
Yeah.
Another, and this is a good segue, but another a story which I wanted to recommend, a graphic novel, which I feel is again about a very a 30-something now, and it's quite interesting because the protagonist of this author's previous series is the author is Brian Lee O'Malley, and he made a series called Scott Pilgrim, obviously versus the universe. Then there were
the greatest.
That series is, it goes down as probably one of my favorite graphic novels of all time.
Absolutely.
But man, I keep thinking about it, but it came out a really, really long time ago. So I was kind of keen on figuring out what Brian Lee O'Malley was up to next, because like that guy has such a good grasp of what young people are like, and the way they kind of converse with each other, the colloquialisms with which they kind of speak to each other. He kind of manages to translate that into not just like dialogue, but also just like expression, and using not very detailed kind of characters. They're very cartoony looking characters. At least that's what his art style is. So he wrote a book in 2015, or at least he released a book in 2015 called Seconds, which is also his sophomore kind of, at least not book, because he's obviously released many Scott Pilgrim books, but this is like his newest kind of adventure with fresh characters and things like that. And the interesting thing about it is that it feels like it's just another story that could exist within the Scott Pilgrim universe, which is basically Toronto, but it just has a bunch of like science fiction elements and things that he loves because he's so influenced by anime and things like that. So Seconds is really the story of this one girl. Well, she's like kind of like it kind of reminds me of like Scott Pilgrim, but if Scott Pilgrim basically grew up, and Scott Pilgrim obviously is set in his 20s, but this is about somebody who's entering her 30s and kind of obviously felt very relatable to me, because I was just like, okay, cool, the 20s are up. It's time to kind of think about like what's next and how to become an adult and basically excel at that. So it's the story of this one, she's a chef who has this restaurant, and and it's called Seconds. And she wants to basically start this new restaurant because she has a lot of associated memories with this one, which aren't always good. Some are good, some are bad. But basically, she had this guy who she was in love with, but then, that kind of didn't work out. And so she wants a fresh start, and thus the whole kind of Seconds thing kind of plays into. And she wants to basically renovate this really, really old building into creating a new restaurant called Katie. Her name is Katie. And
But Seconds is such a good name for a restaurant.
Yeah, so Seconds is already the restaurant that exists. And that's really the whole point of the story, which is and this is not like a volume-based story. This is just one like big graphic novel,
right?
Which has this whole story kind of in it. And so she wants to do that, but everyone is saying that you shouldn't make that building, and you shouldn't renovate it because it's going to cost you a lot of money, and blah blah blah. And it starts off as a very regular tale about a 30-something now who's trying to kind of figure out her life and what's her next move that will essentially come to define her. And it just suddenly kind of turns into this really weird fantasy story where she basically finds out that there's spirits that live in every kind of old home, and she meets one, and which leads her to this really kind of old cupboard inside her house when she sleeps at Seconds. So Seconds is like this big old kind of bungalow, and like the bottom floor is obviously the restaurant, and the top is where she lives, and the basement is where the kitchen is, and a bunch of other offices are. So she finds this instruction manual which says that basically if you just consume this mushroom, you can basically and write the mistakes of what you've made like that day, or if you want to correct a mistake, and then just consume this mushroom and just let life happen after that.
Very Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, it's super fantasy based. So she makes a small error in the beginning of the book where she spills a lot of hot oil onto this one waitress, like this employee who she kind of likes but is a very shy kind of girl and stuff like that, and she feels like terrible about it. So she remembers this thing that she finds in her cupboard, and she goes and she has it, and when she wakes up the next day, nothing has happened. Like, she hasn't spilled oil, everyone's fine, everyone's moving around, and it's chill. And she's just like, yo. And the spirit over there tells her you can only do this once, right? And obviously she's a kind of a selfish person, and she wants to kind of correct all the mistakes that she's made in life, like, losing that previous lover, maybe making a better decision with this new restaurant that she wants to open. And she kind of basically ends up going on a quest to kind of recreate scenarios and fix everything in her life using these mushrooms.
It's a classic killing baby Hitler, but for your personal life.
Exactly. So she tries to kind of recreate, but obviously there are consequences, and that's really what the book is about. And it's really, really great. The book, I really enjoyed it. I read it in one sitting, and it's just really what I really love about it is that how good he is at being able to kind of depict people our age, and it's not just that, it's not got to do with like the fact that they live in Toronto and, or they're white, or they, do these things. It's just like, it's a very universal kind of story about people our age. And I think that's what he's always been good at. And, well, at least like urban kids, like people who grew up in cities and, have a tough relationship with their parents, or, have a difficult relationship with people around them. So it's like, and lots of anxiety. So it's very much in the vein of like what we generally kind of live, at least people like us. And so I found that to be like one of the best things that I've read in the last couple of years.
Nice.
So Seconds, I would suggest, is definitely, if you haven't read Brian Lee O'Malley, I'd say start maybe. I'd say you can start with Seconds also, because it's a shorter story overall.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little less, anime heavy and, fantasy heavy than Scott Pilgrim. Scott Pilgrim is a lot of stuff going on and very reliant on, nostalgia and, and things like that. But this is a very like modern story with a bit of fantasy in it and a big lesson to learn. So Seconds, really good.
Nice.
Start with that, then get to Scott Pilgrim, and you will not be disappointed.
So Unbeatable, Squirrel Girl beats up the Marvel Universe, and Seconds. Those are our first set of recommendations. Let's take a break, and we'll come back and talk about a few more.
Let's do it.
Hi, I'm DJ, one of the presenters of the Edges and Sledges cricket podcast. I'm based in London and host the podcast along with my friend from school, Varun, who's based in Singapore, and his brother Ashwin, who's based in the US. We've all been massive fans of Indian cricket all our lives, and despite living in 3 different time zones and having pretty busy professional lives, we decided to start our own cricket podcast in March 2018. After putting out 59 episodes on our own, we were delighted to join IVM in May 2019, becoming the first pre-existing podcast to be picked up by India's largest podcast network. We've chatted with some awesome people, had some fantastic cricketing conversations along the way. But the main reason we do this every week is to have fun discussing the same cricket topics and issues that you guys are talking about every day in your living rooms. We're fans, not experts, so expect us to be honest. We really hope you decide to join us every week on the podcast.
Hey guys, we're back. We're talking about graphic novels and comic books and one-shots and miniseries and all the different types of comic books. So, Dinks, is there maybe another recommendation you would have? Maybe this time with, well, I guess Squirrel Girl is still is a fairly popular character right now. Would you have a
seen a
recommendation?
resurgence, yeah.
Yes. Would you have a recommendation for something outside Marvel Comics or any kind of house of big illustrating house?
Why, yes, I would.
Great.
So, in fact, I actually wanted to pick a couple of examples that open up the format, because I think one of the interesting things about graphic novels has always been that they tend to be more experimental. I mean, that's not strictly true, of course. There are wildly experimental novels as well. But yeah, graphic novels have the option to try formats in a medium sense as well. Like novels are typically inventive in terms of structure or writing style.
Yeah.
But graphic novels can do stuff like completely silent chapters, for example, or very wordy chapters, or like another classic example is how Watchmen has like a mirrored narrative for one of the issues, stuff like that. So I wanted to talk about a couple of web graphic novels, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, one of them is more standard. It's called On a Sunbeam. It's by an author called Tilly Walden.
Oh, yeah, dude. I was good. Wow, amazing. I've been reading this. Yeah, it's great.
It's so good, right? It's
so good.
It's a bizarre story. It's essentially about a girl who, like a teenager at like different points in her life. So it kind of like jumps back and forth between her later in life and her as a teenager, who joins a ship of like a crew of all female crew members who essentially, I think, live in space on a giant ship, but go around fixing old structures that are kind of like castles or whatnot. Like, it's hard to explain.
It's hard to explain, but yeah, it
is. And they never
actually
actually explain in the book. It's just like, well, this is what we do. And I'm like, what is this world? It's surreal.
I think that's what's so nice about it. That it was so refreshing to just see, like, and the art is so good.
It's stunning.
Yeah, and it's weird.
It's
because
all black and white,
but
like just beautifully done. Because like the settings themselves are so surreal. So you have like space, but you have like medieval kind of architecture.
Medieval
in the
stuff.
Middle of it.
It's really, really awesome. And I was just intrigued because like it was sent to me by somebody who I don't really consider to kind of read graphic novels at all. So I was just like, oh, okay, cool. I should just check this out. And then I was just like, yo, how have you not sent this to me before?
Yeah.
And I was just like, so I think what's really interesting about it is that it's very, it doesn't even, like you said, it breaks the format a little bit. Even the way that, it's structured on the website in which it is housed is like, it's just like different from how you would consume generally a comic book. And I've been like reading it not in like a physical form. Obviously you can't, and not on an iPad, but just on my like monitor. So I get to see like it in this big kind of format, which is really like different and weird to see. And yeah, it's awesome, man. It's like something that is breaking the format a little bit for graphic novels right now, and the way you would consume it, like just the medium in which.
So it's a slight change in the sense of like the art style and the setting are weird, but it's also a classic story. Like it's about essentially a girl, like it's a coming of age story almost, just in a fantastical sci-fi setting. So I would definitely recommend that. And the other one that I want to talk about that like really upends the format almost is a graphic. I don't know if you could even call it a graphic novel, but essentially a graphic story called Magos Room by a lady called Emily Carroll. And so you can read it on the internet. I was just looking up the link. It's M Carroll, or just look for Magos Room on the Googles, or on mcarroll.com/comics/Margot, MARGOT. So how this story works essentially is when you open it up, there's like a couplet sort of thing at the top. And like the art piece is essentially like in someone's handwriting, couplet, like a short verse, and a drawing of a room, clearly a child's room. Like there's a little doll off to the side, a mirror, dead flowers, and a bed that is covered in blood, and a window open to like. So it's kind of like a not horror-ish, slightly horror-ish sort of story. If you remember the graphic novel that's contained within Watchmen, Tales of the Black Freighter.
Yeah.
It's somewhat in that vein, is what I thought at first. But like because the format is essentially like one woman talking about her grief over the death of her child.
Yeah.
But as you read it, you start to slowly think she's kind of gone insane. And then there's a twist to that as well. But how the story is structured is what is like really beautiful. So there's only this one panel, and you can kind of hover around with your cursor, and each item in the room leads you to another section of the story. So it's constructed in such a way that you can actually read it in any order you want and piece together the story. So like you are constructing the narrative, though there is only one narrative. So it's different from like a choose your own adventure type thing. It's more of like a choose your own plot structure kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because they're all like almost semi-contained by themselves. But you can read each of them in whatever order. In fact, what's interesting is I kind of read it in what I thought was the prescribed order, but then I went back and read it in another order, and it was kind of really good both ways. So like I feel like it rewards multiple readings, and the story itself, most importantly, is great. It's about a woman. It's got like slightly fantastical horror-ish elements, it seems like. But yeah, essentially it's about a woman whose child has died, and she's kind of trying to come to terms with how to process that. So yeah, just a wildly inventive structure and a great story.
Great. Sweet. So that's an interesting way of like basically kind of consuming these things, especially because of the internet. I remember Scott McCloud used to do this kind of thing about how panels are arranged and like which way you kind of go forward kind of pushes the story forward or backwards. So there are really, really interesting ways to consume graphic novels these days. I'd even suggest that there are some really, really good webcomics online on a website called Tapastic.
Do you know when that happened?
Yeah, I put a timeline footnote, 7-minute mark.
Cool. And we start again.
What was I saying?
You're talking about Scott McCloud.
Yes. So yeah, anyway, point is there are amazing ways to consume comic books, especially because right, I was going to talk about something else.
Okay. We begin now.
Another amazing kind of place on the web you could check out to read shorter kind of web comics and done by amazing artists nonetheless. So the quality is nothing less than what you'd find in a printed volume. But you guys can check out Tapastic. It's this. It's a website just dedicated. It's a platform actually for creators, but just for webcomics, and these artists put out like issues like almost like every week, and so it's a very like ongoing platform. And there's some really, really amazing kind of issues that you guys can check out over there, and different series. And literally, there's like a comic for literally every subgenre. So you should definitely check that out if you're interested. I was going to probably end with a classic, which is a mini series of a character we all know and love, and it's Batman. Because I feel like the problem with Batman is that you don't, again, because he's literally the most celebrated comic book character of all time, you don't know where to begin. And if everybody knows so much about Batman, but it's not reading about Batman enough, I'd say. And there are some amazing runs that have happened over the last few years. I want to talk about a slightly newer iteration of Batman, because a lot of people don't know about what's happened to Batman since, I'd say, maybe the Adam West Batman. A lot of new characters are in Batman. Like, people know Batman, Robin, Catwoman, and the Joker, right? And they know maybe a bit of the Rogues Gallery, but they don't know about the newer iterations of Bat Family, about Red Robin or Tim Drake, who is Red Robin, or Jason Todd, etc. But of course, Batman has gone on to kind of have a family, and so many things have happened in his life where there's even a point in the story which I'm going to talk about called the Gates of Gotham. If you want to read well, it's not really new. It's about maybe close to 10 years old, but it kind of sums up a lot about what's happening in Batman's life. And it doesn't have Batman in it at all, which is the interesting. Well, it's got Batman, but Batman has gone on to kind of do this main mission, and by that I mean Bruce Wayne. And so the mantle of Batman is taken on by Dick Grayson, who is the only person he ever trusts to kind of wear the cowl. And so it's a story about Dick Grayson trying to become a better Batman and knowing that he's always going to kind of fail. But of course, it doesn't shy away from being a great kind of detective story, which you can... It's a 5-issue series called The Gates of Gotham. And it does what I really love about Batman stories, which is kind of digs into the past about Gotham City's own kind of sordid history, and kind of tells a story about the founders of Gotham and has a completely new villain called the Architect. So it kind of reminded me of the Batman Telltale series, which kind of really dives into who the Waynes are and the Cobblepots and basically kind of brings together the history of Gotham, in this parallel story while it's kind of, talking about who Robin is and what the Bat family means to him and how he needs to kind of cope with being Batman even without having the same skill set. So it's kind of got a bit of both. A great detective story, and it's got just a bunch of colorful characters. It's got the Penguin. It's got Damian Wayne, who's the new and current Robin right now. So it's got Cassandra Cain. It's got like just a bunch of like really, really cool bad characters. So
would it serve as a good introduction to all these new characters that maybe a lot of people are not familiar with?
Yes, that's precisely why I was recommending it. So it's a self-contained story which will tell you a little bit about Gotham and a little bit about this new family and where Robin kind of fits in. Well, all the Robins kind of fit into this narrative and how they feel about their new roles being in this family. And so, and it does all of these things in 5 issues. Nice. So yeah, I would suggest The Gates of Gotham. Great run. And kind of if you liked Court of Owls or if you haven't read Court of Owls, then you can read this one before that or after that. Both are great. History of Gotham kind of storylines. Nice. Right. So I think we have covered good ground.
Yeah, that's a fairly interesting range of graphic novels that you can start from. So, and man, we've covered stuff that you could read right away just by going to a website. And what is better than that? Yeah. So check those out. And like we said, there's a very wide range of graphic novels and one-off graphic stories. So reach out to us and tell us which ones you like. And we'll see you next time, you nerds.
Bye.
Hi, I'm Satyajit.
Hi, I'm Racheta.
We are from the Open Library Project and we host a podcast called Paperback.
Paperback is a podcast where we engage with stalwarts and experts from various industries, suggesting non-fiction titles that contributed to their journey in a big way.
We've had guests like Anjali Rana, Dr. Marcus Rani, Dr. Swati Lodha, Ambi Parmeswaran, Apurva Damani, and many more on our show Paperback. Find new episodes every Wednesday on IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Do you wish you were smarter? Well, so do we. But the next best thing?
We could make you sound smarter.
And to help you with this endeavor, we are Simplified, a podcast that attempts to break down the complex world around you with a little knowledge, a lot of poor jokes, and a ton of random trivia.
Episodes out every Monday.
On the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.
See ya!